We built an AI-powered training simulation recently, and for a brief, beautiful moment, I thought, oh wow, this actually works. The learner could type what they'd say in a difficult conversation, the AI character would respond, and in the end, they'd get feedback. Amazing. And then we started testing it properly, and things got a bit wobbly. The AI went off topic, it broke character, it started evaluating the learner halfway through the conversation, it tried to be way too helpful, and sometimes nothing at all showed up in the module, which is always a fun moment when you're staring at the screen thinking, great, I just built a very expensive blank box. And that was the lesson for me. An AI bot working once is not the same as an AI bot that you can trust. In this video, I'll share what we learned testing an AI-powered simulation and why the messy testing phase might just be the most important part of the build. Because one good demo can tell you that the thing can work, but it doesn't tell you whether it works when real learners use it. So don't confuse a good demo with a tested product. That's where the real work starts. And that's what we'll look at next. So once we realized the AI simulation wasn't working reliably, the next question was, how do we actually test the thing? At first, we were basically testing on vibes. Did the response feel right? Did it sound human? Did it seem useful? And look, vibes have their place, but vibes aren't a quality assurance framework. Because if you're testing an AI-powered learning experience, you need to define what good looks like before you start judging the output. For example, one of our AI characters was called Moana, and a good response for Moana meant she kept her response short, she stayed in role, she didn't start coaching the learner during roleplay, she recognized when the conversation had ended, and when she gave feedback, she only evaluated what the learner had actually said. That last one was really important because sometimes AI can fill in the gaps. It can assume intent, it can invent content, and it can give feedback on something the learner didn't actually say. In a learning simulation, that's a problem because feedback needs to be based on evidence, not AI hallucinations. So we changed the way we approach testing to be more like marking an exam. You need the marking guide before you can judge the answer. So that was our next lesson. Before you test an AI simulation, define what good actually looks like. Otherwise, you're not really testing, you're just reacting. Once we knew what good looked like, the next challenge was working out what to test. And the obvious place to start was the happy path. What happens when the learner responds exactly the way we expect? It's a useful test, but it's not enough because learners don't always behave like the imaginary perfect learner in your head. There's an old software testing joke. A tester walks into a bar and orders 1 beer, 2 beers, 0 beers, 99,999,999 beers. A lizard in a beer glass, -1 beers, gibberish beers, and everything works fine, testing complete. But then a real customer walks into the bar and asks where the bathroom is, and the bar bursts into flames. You get the point, right? And that was basically our first AI simulation. It worked when people used it the way we expected, but real learners don't always do that. They go off topic, they're blunt, they're rude, and with AI, that matters because one weird input can send the conversation sideways. So we had to test good inputs, bad inputs, rude inputs, abusive inputs, off-topic inputs, and combinations that sounded sort of relevant, but were actually trying to pull the AI away from the scenario. And we couldn't just test once. One successful chat didn't prove that the prompt was reliable, because sometimes we'd make a change that improved one response, but made 3 other responses worse. So we had to test lots of examples, keep track of what changed, and then rerun old tests when we edited the prompt, which was tedious at times, but it was also very necessary because the goal wasn't trying to prove that the simulation worked when everything went perfectly. The goal was trying to find out what happened when it didn't. So that was the next lesson we learned. Don't just test the learner that you hope will use it. Test the learner who's tired, distracted, confused, blunt, curious, or trying to break the system, because that's where your simulation either becomes reliable or falls over. Once testing started exposing problems, the next question was, how do we actually fix this thing? And that's where AI became really useful because you can use AI to troubleshoot AI. When something went wrong, I'd give ChatGPT the evidence. I'd say, here's what the learner typed, here's what the bot responded with, here's what I expected to happen, and here's what actually happened. Now that was much more useful than just saying, the bot said something weird, please fix it. Although honestly, that was sometimes the case. The key was to turn the problem into something testable. For example, I could say, I expected Moana to stay in role and respond briefly in under 25 words, but instead she gave advice, broke character, and wrote 2 long paragraphs, each of 25 words. Now we had a specific failure to investigate. And so then I'd ask ChatGPT, give me 3 possible causes and 1 way to test each. That phrasing mattered. I didn't ask, why did this fail? Because AI can be very confident and very wrong sometimes. So the process became name the failure, diagnose possible problems, make 1 targeted change, rerun the old test, then check nothing else broke. And that last part was really important because sometimes fixing one problem created a new one somewhere else. But the final lesson was this, that AI could help us troubleshoot and fix problems, but it couldn't be the only judge. A human still had to ask, does this sound realistic? Does this fit the organization? Would this actually help one of our learners practice? Because the goal isn't just trying to make the bot behave. The goal is to create a practice experience that feels useful, realistic, and trustworthy. And after a lot of testing, troubleshooting, and slightly painful iteration, that's what we ended up with. I'm Kane Prentice from Pukeko Learning Solutions. Thanks for listening.